was given the assignment to talk about iridescent stretch glass, the confusion about cut and etched, and for some of you, you probably have already come up and asked me. I know I got you a second ago. They came up, well, what cutting is this? Well, no, that's an etching. So to me, it's important to understand the differences for these. Partially, I was talking to another one of our members this morning that there's no way that any company could make the glass that we see today, especially this decorated material, and make money at it. It was difficult processes. There are OSHA regs that probably would have excluded a lot of the things that we see being made today. The hydrofluoric acid is a very dangerous acid, and you have to have special equipment, special facility to operate with that and so forth. So we'll talk about these. The first thing I wanted to talk about is what are the differences between these. And to begin with, cutting is actually removing of the glass physically. You're cutting into the glass. And you're all familiar with the high-end cut crystal glass. The process is the same. However, when it comes to our iridescent stretch glass, what the cutters were doing was typically cutting through the iridescence to reveal the base color and give a contrast to that. And so in this particular process, they were using originally diamond dust impregnated wheels, or they were using what they call copper wheels. These were wheels that ground down pretty quickly, and they replaced them, but they were cheap to use, and they would use a diamond paste with that in order to access the grinding. Now today we've got carborundums and other types of cutting tools, but they didn't really have those, the types of equipment that we have today that can cut through glass fairly easily. Also, they would polish them, and to polish them, once the cutter had done the cutting, that person may actually do the polishing, or they may hand it off to another person that actually does the polishing. And in that particular case, it was probably a buffing wheel, a soft either leather wheel or a felt wheel, in which that very fine diamond powder was added to that, and that was polished. And you can actually see many of these, when we have cut ovals, you'll see that those are polished, and these are polished, but you can see in between these. Now I'm going to pass this around so that you can see some of the details that I'm talking about. When you get the light just right, if you take a look at the large leaves, what you'll see is there's some really faint lines in that. And what that's telling me is that the grinding wheel ground that out, and the polisher didn't really polish off all those little striations that were made during that cutting. Now on this one, if you hold it up, you also see there's these little flowers in here, and around the edges of the heart, you'll also see what looks like little tiny fine lines. That is a ganged wheel of copper discs. Each one of them was making that little cut, and so that's how you get those little lines. But again, that would be polished off if they wanted that to be polished. So go ahead, take a look at that. Also, what do you see on those? What are the designs for that? What do you see here? A heart with a arrow through it. And my feeling is this is a Fenton piece. And I suspect the cutting was done in the Fenton factory. We know that Fenton had a cutting shop in their factory at this time. But my feeling is that one of the workers, or maybe even one of the Fenton family, took this to the cutters and said, I've upset my wife or something. Could you make me something? Or it could be Valentine gift or something like that. It's the only one I've seen with that, fairly unique. But it's a good illustration of some of the cutting and polishing techniques, and so feel free to take a look at that. Now, etching is a completely different process. Etching uses what we call a wax resist. And what all of these companies did that did the etching, they had an etching shop, and in the etching shop they actually had these metal plates that they would load with wax. They would smear a hot wax on them, let it dry out, then they'd scrape it off, and where there were the impressions inside of that metal plate, the wax remained. They'd then put a piece of paper on the top of that and release that wax onto a piece of paper. And so you would have this wax design on a piece of paper, and then the ladies that were in the shop would take those designs and they would tape those papers in here, rub them down, and the wax would stick onto the glass. And then they would lift that off, and when the wax resist was on here, hydrofluoric acid is a really strange acid. It will eat through your skin, number one, but it's a really weird thing. Most, hydrochloric acid and many of the other acids won't etch through glass, but hydrofluoric is one that will etch and eat through glass. So actually, to keep hydrofluoric acid, you have to keep it in a wax bottle. It's kind of a weird stuff. Now today they have some plastics that are resistant to that, and they can keep it in those, but in the past what they would do is put that wax resist on, and then they would either fume it, they would stick the whole piece into a hydrofluoric fuming hood, and the vapors of the hydrofluoric acid would eat through it, or they would take a solution of that. And by the way, you can still buy today on the market, you can buy dilute solutions of the hydrofluoric acid for hobbyists, and you can etch your own glass, but it's really a low volume. I've tried it. You have to it seemed like, they say you only have to leave it on for 15 or 20 minutes. Well, 4 hours later, I finally got it to etch through the glass that I was trying to put a design on, and so it's very weak. But once they would finish that, and basically where the etching is, you can feel on these, anything that's depressed, that's where the wax wasn't. So if you think about it, they actually had to paint wax all the way around in here. They put the design of the wax off of that paper, peeled it off on here, and then put the hydrofluoric acid on here, making sure that it didn't dribble down into the middle of the bowl, or you would have eaten the middle of the bowl out. After it had given a certain amount of time of etching in here, you wash the hydrofluoric acid off, and then you can take an organic solvent, just kerosene or something like that, remove the wax, and now you have an etched piece. But you can't see the etching usually. And so what they would then do is accent that by, in this particular case, what they did is they put a gold paint on the whole area. They brushed that on, and then they came by and wiped it off. And wherever the depressions were, that gold stayed in that, but where it was the original glass, that got wiped off. Now, there's a whole bunch of these designs. The etching shops were not all that common, and as a matter of fact, probably the most common etching shop was the Wheeling Decorating Company. Well, I'll show you some pictures of this. It's kind of interesting that you can find a Northwood bowl like this with the drapery etching of Wheeling, but you can also find a Fenton bowl with the same decoration. So though that decorating company bought blanks from several companies, but they put their design on it, okay? Excuse me. Now, glue chip is neither etching nor cutting. To me, it's in a category all of its own. And basically, when you see this, it almost looks like, a lot of people say it looks like the frost on your windshield on a real cold morning. It's got that frost look, sprays of random lines in the glass. Basically, what this was done is it's called glue chip, and they had a special glue. Now, Barry Wiggins said that the industry used to call it fish glue. Now, that doesn't mean that it came from fish, though there's some people that have made that interpretation that maybe it was rendered fish bones or fish scales or something like that. But apparently, when you heated it, it smelled like a dead fish. And so my feeling is, It was probably a really strong hide glue or something like that, that when it was dried up and put in the kiln, that it smelled like a dead fish. But the bottom line, what they would do is they would, wherever they wanted that decoration to be, they would paint that glue on there. Yep, somehow I've lost this. You can hear me okay? Yeah, all right. Basically, I suspect we've got a low battery or something going on in here. But in essence, they would paint it on. They would then put it in an annealing oven or the Lear, depending on the size of the facility. And once they heated this back up to about 400 to 500 degrees, that glue would seize. It would start to pull back. And it was so strong, it would lift the glass off. And so that's where you get the glue chip, is that the glue itself would chip off the glass in that pattern. And of course, then they would accent that by putting gold paint on it so that you could really see it in greater detail. To me, the interesting thing about glue chip, there are no two pieces alike because of that process. It's not like etching. In etching, all those patterns will be the same in that etch, but there's no two pieces of glue chip that are the same. Now, I put in a last one here of sandblasting. And I had some discussions with Frank about this. He believed, and I believe, that there may have been a couple of plates, some designs on some plates. I'll show you some pictures of those that may have been sandblasted, because they really look very crude. The lines are very crude. It's not like you'd put a wax resist on there and subjected it to the hydrofluoric acid. Just doesn't look that way. Now, in their later years, Fenton did use a fair amount of sandblasting in decoration. And in some of the more recent material, there are some sandblasted designs on those. And to me, they look like, you can see the sort of a satiny effect. But if you look at it real closely, the satin, or what I call the satin effect surface, is much more rough in a sandblasting than in the original satining process. Any questions? Am I going too fast, too slow? Okay. Yes, Pam. Yes, it should originally have it. The question is, do all of the glue chip have the gold paint on them? I have seen them without. And the ones that I've seen without, when I use my hand lens, I see little pieces of gold still in those cracks and crevices. Remember, this gold paint can be removed fairly easily, and my feeling is that it can be scrubbed off if you're not careful and could remove it. But I think all the original would have had gold paint on it to accent it, because it's when you've seen a piece where that gold has been removed, it just sort of, there's a sort of difference in it, and you really have to pick it up and look at it. You say, oh, well, that's glue chip, but it's lost the gold decoration. Any other questions? Okay. Now, let's take a look at some of the common cuttings. And here's a cutting that I think most of us in the industry call the matchstick. Again, if you look at this with a hand lens, what you'll see is the little circle at the top, and the lines were done by that gang copper wheel. It's a set of little lines. And we've had, I think you brought this in, okay. Well, who made this? Come on now. Fenton made this. And I thought Millie would at least say it.
No, I know that's what it was.
Okay.
I was letting somebody else.
So we've got a diamond with this and a Fenton with this. So what does that suggest to you?
They copied each other.
Yeah. And what I was hoping is that you might say, well, was there a secondary decorating shop that did this? And no, as far as I'm concerned, both shops, both Northwood and Fenton, easily could have had them. I see the same thing on Northwood, but Northwoods are a really different design on oops, This isn't a Northwood piece. This is another Fenton piece. I've got a Northwood one that's also got this design. This one's a little bit tougher to see in that you can see that it's got the matchsticks here, but it also has a ring of cutting here with little ovals on the inside of that. Now, I'll show you some pictures of that. Do the people that had the crystal diamond, are they here? One of the people that was here yesterday came in and showed me this. Oh, right there. Okay. She's got, talk to her, she's got a beautiful set of the diamond with this punch bowl. And unfortunately, that's not my punch bowl. But I do have the punch bowl base. I'm sorry, vase that I'm using it, but this is really a punch bowl base. And this should be turned up the other side, and that bowl that I just showed you would sit on this. Now, when you see this, I don't think they made very many of these, because when you see it, you got this big bowl like this sitting on this little tiny pedestal. And boy, I have a feeling that those things rocked easily and probably got knocked over and broken and so forth. But she's got a beautiful example of this in crystal, both the punch bowl, the base, and a pair of candle holders, also with this matchstick cutting on it. Here's some more Fenton pieces. And as you can see, the Fenton pieces are virtually identical. But we think that this was an easy thing to do by the cutter that had those gang wheels, and they copied each other fairly regularly. Here's Northwood. And you can see the Northwood pieces. And when I saw these, I thought, oh, well, maybe Northwood did the ring around it. But then, of course, we've got a Fenton one here that also has that ring around it. And so you've got to remember that these people were in competition with each other. When they saw things, if it wasn't patented, they said, well, we can do that too, and make those decorations. Now you get into more complicated cuttings, and here's, my feeling is this was probably not done in the Fenton factory, and the reason for that is that I have seen other pieces of glass with this same cutting on it that wasn't Fenton. And you also do have to be aware that there are a few glass decorating companies out there that would cut blanks and do cutting on glass. But this is a pretty outstanding set. We've seen this in the tall jug and the short squatty jug here. Of course, the cut ovals. Now, what did they do with the ovals? After they cut them, they polished them. And so these, actually, again, if you get the light just right, you'll see some little faint striations in there that are left from the cutting and the polishing in that. But again, pretty outstanding. This is cut glass. And my feeling, these are really undervalued when you see these. People that collect these will pay fancy prices, but it really took a lot of time to do all of that cutting and all of that polishing. Blue ones. Okay, let's move into what I consider to be the masters of cutters on our stretch glass, and that's Imperial. There's no doubt about it that Imperial had the widest range of cuttings. They had a number for each one of these designs, and Gary Sincar has only been able to identify about half of all the ones that we know. And we know several of these that by the way, these are on the cheese plates. If you'll notice that these have these rings right in here for a cheese dish. And I wanted to show you that when you get one of those plates, the cheese dish that's in it should also be cut. And so if you take a look at it, and always watch for these. If you can ever find these little cheese dishes, and they all have that same little wispy cut on there. And I've seen them in crystal. I've seen them in smoke, and I've seen them in the marigold rose eyes. Okay? So if you see those, pick them up, because I've got a whole bunch of plates that need them. Now, everyone that I've seen has got that design on it. However, they were put on almost any of the others of these. And here's one of my favorite ones. They really went to town on this one. You can see that they did the gang cutting on the petals of the flower there, and then they polished the center part of it to make it stand out. The leaves were cut but not polished. And so you can see that the leaves themselves, I'll go ahead and pass that around so you can see that. So what that does is it gives you a different effect, that the leaves have that soft satiny look to them. The petals have the little lines on them, and then the inside of the compound flower has that polish. So it gives you some real different effects for that. The question is, how long would it take for a cutter to cut one of these? I don't know, but I'm amazed these cutters are really fast. But my feeling is it would probably take about 45 minutes for a cutter to cut that one. And I had somebody else say, well, didn't they put a template on there? No. When they had the design, and if you'll notice that virtually all of these are in 4s, there are some designs that are in 3rds. But my feeling is that they probably put the flower, they cut the flower, they turned it 180 degrees, did the other one, and then they did the in-between, and then they filled in. And these cutters, if you've ever watched a cutter, there's still some of them up at the Corning Museum and so forth, they really work pretty fast. And they're very accurate without having some template or design sketched on there. Now, that particular flower is of interest to me. And then a few years ago, Renee and I saw this tumble up in a mall, and I said, somebody's married something here. And what I thought originally was that this is a tumble up that had an imperial base. And can you now, after looking at that, see why I said that it has an imperial base? That's the same flower, little smaller version that's on that plate over there, okay, with the little wispy sprays. Then I looked at this tumbler and I thought, boy, that looks like a Fenton cutting to me on there. And I'm still, I think this is a Fenton cutting, but I think it's a married piece because it's not a Fenton tumble up. Yeah, they look the same, but when you get them together, you go, oh no, see, it's not even close. The other reason why I think this is a Fenton one is that we do know that there's a marigold round jug that Fenton made that is in marigold that has pretty much the same cut on this. The other difference is that, did anybody notice a difference in this one? This is ribbed optic, and it should have had a ribbed optic tumbler to go with it. So I think this is a married piece, but it was still nice to get an obvious imperial, at least the base of the guest set. We saw a lot of these cuttings last year when we brought in the handled servers. So I'm not going to go through a great detail, but just sort of go through some of these. Some of these I've given my own names. We haven't found the actual catalog names. Now these other two do have numbers, but I sort of call this one the chrysanthemum. Sometimes the cutters weren't consistent. Look at the top one. It's the same flower, but different leaves. And so I have a feeling that the cutter was assigned to do this. probably went home, had some beer or whatever, and the next morning came in and decided and forgot what direction the leaves went on that. And most of them I've seen are actually in the circle. The one that's kind of out of place, that's the only one I've seen of that particular design. This one I really like as an entomologist. Can you tell why? Now, a lot of people would say it's got a butterfly in it, and I go, no, that's a moth. But I suspect they called it a butterfly in that one. And then the one that we call the balloons, again, that is a number that's been well identified also. Also notice that I'm only showing you these in the smoke and the marigold and not in the crystal. Can you guess why? The crystal ones are really tough to see, absolutely. We can go on and on with these. Now, does anybody recognize the sort of fuchsia flower in the upper right? Has anybody looked at our logo? So that's the same design. However, Cal and I have been looking for the plate. We believe that Rose Presnick, who actually drew our logo in a line drawing, used a mayonnaise plate with that same decoration on it. I have a cheese plate that I've seen with that fuchsia design, and of course the handled servers come with the fuchsia design. But if any of you ever find that mayonnaise plate, Cal would like to get it for the association. So if you ever see a smaller plate with that design on it, we'd really like to see if we could get it. Now let's move to the etchings. Now here's an unusual piece. It's the only one that I'm aware of that's central. And if you take a look at it, a very complicated etched design with a multiple of flowers in here. You can see zinnias in here, and roses and daisies, all types of flowers all combined in there. But it was an etched floral design, and then once they removed the wax resist and they put gold paint on it and jazzed it up that way. My feeling is Central was not known for etching, and this was probably a secondary decorating company that did this. But it's not in the Wheeling decorating pattern book, so it was some other decorating company that did this. And there are a couple of other. Lotus is one that also cut them. This is another Wheeling decorating company's one, and I find it interesting. The guy that wrote the Wheeling decorating company book just sort of put what they consider to be the common names. I believe this one is swirls, darts, and flowers is what they called it. And so they just started to try to describe everything that they saw in that one. This is probably one of the most common decorations that you'll find, and you'll find this one both on Northwood and Fenton pieces. As a matter of fact, there's a Northwood piece, Northwood bowl with the same etched decoration on it. The other one that we call drapery, and we saw the example of this one. I think most of these were originally in console sets, and I am looking for a nice pair of topaz candle holders with this around the base of that. Generally, it was the colonial style candle holders that would have that. You can see. Here's a Fenton one that's got that swirled darts and flower on it. You want to take a look and see what that particular etching looks like. And again, I find this both on Northwood and a few Fenton pieces. Obviously, the Fenton candle holder has got the other design, but I've seen the also what we call the drapery design on that one. Now, Fenton had some unique designs that they fairly consistently used as etching. And in this one, The one that we sort of jokingly call the KKK is a fairly common design that you can see. They used it fairly commonly on fan bases, both short fan bases, tall fan bases. They also used it quite commonly as an edge decoration on their cigarette boxes. And so you can see that etched decoration. But what do you notice on the inside of that? You see a flower. And if you look closely, that flower has the little gang marks in there. So they etched the outside design and cut the flower. So this is cut and etched on this. And I see these all the time, and they'll in the store they'll say cut. I go, no, it's cut and etched. It's got both. Now, here's what's also weird. We've seen some of these boxes with just the flowers, and we've seen other smoking items. There's some cigarette holders and things like that that have just the flower cutting, and then there's others that also have the etching without the cutting. So you can find almost any combination of those. Again, if there's any questions or comments, if you got some unusual pieces, feel free to chime in. Here's a console set that has the glue chip. This is centrals. And again, you've seen the bowl, and there's the matching candle holders that go with that, with the glue chip around the base. Northwood also used glue chip. Now, I don't think I've ever seen a Fenton piece with glue chip. They're generally Northwood and Diamond are the two that will have glue chip. Now, you will find glue chip on non-stretch glass. I've seen glue chip decoration on non-stretch glass also. But here's a Northwood console set, again with the bowl being glue chipped around the top and the candle holders around the bases. Okay, here's the plates that I was talking about that Frank and I kind of feel that these were actually sandblasted with a template and not actually acid etched. And you'll see these designs. It looks like there was probably some sort of a resist template that was put over the top of that. And the reason why, if you take a look at these, the edges of all of these, if you take a look right in here, the edges of these are all very fuzzy. And if they were really, a wax resist was put on there and they were acid etched, it should be a nice, clean, crisp line for that. That's it. I know Cal gave me an hour and a half for this, and I don't think we need it. Now, feel free, sort of the coup de grace that I wanted to show people is, does anybody recognize this bowl? Yeah, it's a Fenton 604 punch bowl, flattened down into an ice cream bowl shape, and they just cut the crud out of this puppy. Okay. Just really decorated it up. Again, what I find is really interesting about this, for those of you that collect Steuben, there are some Steuben Vert de Soie pieces that have almost identical cuttings on them. And when I first saw this, I go, oh, man, that's the biggest Steuben piece I've seen. And then I picked it up and go, whoa, no, this is stretch glass. But my feeling is somebody in the decorating shop said, we can do as good as they can over there. Pretty neat piece. Yeah, I would normally have put this on what really pops it is I got a cobalt blue base that this could sit on. Much to the chagrin of Roy Ash. I didn't put this one in here or in the pictures, but does anybody recognize that? This is Lancaster, okay? And it's got a cutting. Lancaster did have a cutting shop, And so it's a fairly unusual piece. But I've seen some other what I call plain marigold iridized that have cuttings on them also from the Lancaster shop. So they did have a cutting shop in there. So, but finding a piece of stretch glass with cutting was a real nice item to find.
You mentioned the copper wheels. Did they ever use the stone wheels?
The question is, did they ever use stone wheels? I don't think so, because I think the stone wheels abraded pretty fast in that. The copper was fast enough. Any other questions? Whew, we're done here. Hopefully I've given you a little time to get out and get some shopping. Cal didn't give you enough time to get some shopping done around here. Thank you very much.